Father Michael Screene here in County Waterford at the Sacred Heart Missionary House. You're here because of a chapter that's going on at the moment. Can you talk to me first about your own life, about where you were brought up?
I was born and brought up in northeast Galway on a small farm. And I went to secondary school in Sacred Heart College in Western Road in Cork. I did my philosophy and theology studies with the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart and was ordained in 1963.
Coming from what kind of a background?
A small farm background, one of 12 children.
My goodness, so where did you fit in?
9th or 10th. I have a twin sister.
Oh, have you? Okay. And so your decision to go on and get involved in religious life, did that come easy or?
Well, it was an age when the church and religion were just presumed to be very important and central in most people's lives, and that was the kind of background in my own family. So that would have been a thought from early on, and after doing the leaving, I made a decision to go on to the novitiate. But I think the decisions about religious life and priesthood are not only initial ones. Why did I come? But also, along the way for most people, why did I stay?
Well, we'll talk about that as time goes on. Can you tell me your formation years, did they go quickly?
I enjoyed my formation years in spite of a lot of negative criticisms. There were times of very formal scholastic education. But I was studying theology while the Vatican Council was in progress, and that was a time of new imagination and new openings that became very significant for me.
Exciting times then? Exciting
times, and times of promise that even unfortunately we've rolled back a bit on.
Where did all your studies, were they here at home, or did you go to Rome?
All my studies were in Ireland. After ordination, then I went to University College Cork to do a degree and a diploma in education. And from there I went to teach in one of the new comprehensive schools beginning in England for some years.
What year were you ordained?
1963.
Was that the same year you went to England?
No, I spent 4 years at university after ordination.
Oh yes, you said.
Which meant that I was then, by the time I finished there, I had been at school without break for 22 years.
Oh, right.
I'm a slow learner.
Tell me about your time in England. Where exactly were you assigned to?
Yeah, I was assigned to a new town in Harold Wilson's constituency, a place called Kirby, just on the Manchester Road out of Liverpool, where about 60 to 70,000 people were taken out from the slums of Liverpool, and a whole new set-up of education started. And Labour brought in the comprehensive schools at the time, and I went there as an experiment with Liverpool Diocese to see how a priest teaching in a comprehensive school might be valuable or not. So it was a kind of guinea pig situation.
And how did you get on there?
Very mixed. It was a time of great difficulty. It was a very stressful world. Kirby at the time had the youngest population anywhere in the world, with 30% I think were at school, and without any high motivation background from the experience, and therefore you got a very mixed situation. And with the comprehensive school you had a whole range of pupils coming in. Some years we took in 500 new pupils into the school, and in that you had people who were really ESN and should have been in special school, and big numbers in remedial. So we had a very big remedial department looking after them, and I think looking after them well. At the top levels we had A-level, O-level, and these were very well catered for. Then, a typical thing of the time, there was a group in between, remedial and exam people, who tended to fall through the net and were a big difficulty for the school.
So this was stressful then?
It was stressful, but when you're young, or when you're in a situation anywhere, I always feel that stress becomes opportunity as well.
Okay.
And it was an experience I wouldn't like to have missed either.
Really? Yeah. After 4 years then?
After 7 years there, after 7 years there, I was elected provincial. And then that brought me around the world for 6 years, working at home as in administration work. Things were changing so quickly after the Vatican Council, so a very big part of my time as provincial was to try to engage with the changes that were happening in the church and happening in the country as well, and in religious life, and how to work towards the renewal and transformation of religious life.
That's an interesting period now, in that you were still a young man. You were very young.
Yes.
And you were given this responsible job.
And they tell me now I was far too young. But yes, that is true. I wasn't working on my own. I had a council. Also, at that stage, the religious congregations got together as a conference, as it was called then, of major religious superiors. So we did quite a lot of work, reflection, courses and so on. In renewal, we did them together. And our congregation got very involved with them in Myreswood and in Dublin.
This house we're in here, you were here at the very beginning, weren't you?
Yeah, well, while I was provincial, we looked at the possibility of opening a retreat house in Waterford because this area did not have one. And the bishop welcomed us. And eventually, just before I finished in office, we bought this house. And my new provincial, I don't know whether it was punishing me or not, sent me here to work in the house and organise it.
Who was it bought from?
It was bought from a local man named Anderson. They had been here for, I'd say, most of 200 years. Looked a bit like minor gentry, connected with Zimbabwe, South Africa. Quite a British background. And the old man died here, and he left the house in a trust to be sold just as we were looking for a house. So we bought that and then developed the residential side.
So did this become a retreat house? Or?
Yes, this became a retreat house and is still a retreat house.
Yeah. Soon to be sold again?
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
At what stage then did you get your long-term appointment to Russia? When did that come?
Well, I worked here for 9 years and took some time to do some study as well. And then I was put into formation work with students in Galway. And at that stage, possibilities began to open up in Russia. So we discussed that. I was on the provincial council at that point, and we discussed that and asked the question of whether there was something we could contribute. And even though we were now getting short a bit on staff, everybody agreed that we should send 3 priests there, 4 to help. So I went with the first group.
As a pioneer going to Russia, I mean, had you any idea what you were getting yourselves into?
I had. My background is history, and I taught history up to university level in England, and I taught 20th century history, which includes all the background. I'd have read a lot on Russia long before I learned the language, and on the World War, I was teaching that at A level in England. The Hitler era, the Stalin era, so I would have been well acquainted with the Russian background. But of course, it's another thing to come into it, and another thing at an old age to learn the language.
What age were you? What year was this?
I went in 1975. I was 58.
And at that stage, you were the ideal man because you had a good knowledge, a good background behind you. What were you given a brief?
Well, we saw very quickly that you just cannot function there without the language. And as a result, we went to Moscow to learn the language. And while there, we negotiated with the church authorities, and we were asked to take on a mission in the southern rim of Russia, in the little republics, Chechnya included. And eventually we went down there to work on the southern rim borders of Georgia.
Talk to me about
between
Moscow
the Black
first.
Sea
Yeah.
and the Pasig.
Yeah, but Moscow was your first port of call, wasn't it?
Yes, and Moscow then and Moscow now is very different. Moscow then was still really to walk around, and the way it looked was real Soviet. All the big monuments and no renovation done. Moscow today is an exceptionally modern city, beautiful, but at that stage it was difficult. It was difficult also for, always there's a certain xenophobia in Russia about foreigners, and you find that sometimes, but not in an oppressive way, in our experience.
Yeah, but talk to me about the people. Did they accept you?
There were various levels. At the top level, church relationships are very political, so that how the Pope got on with the Patriarch was always problematic at that stage. The bishops you meet were very varied, from a person who wouldn't shake hands to you to people who would come and have a meal with you. The priests, in my experience, were very easy to deal with. And the priests vary from being highly educated to being very poorly educated. But my experience with the local priests was positive. The ordinary people, I never had a difficulty in 8 years with any person in terms by being a Catholic. And the ordinary people we meet would have a lot of respect. The Catholics were particularly ecumenical. Very interesting. Maybe when you're a minority you can afford to be that. But I was amazed at that, because I did think we'd have people who were a very small minority in Russia would find themselves very defensive. But I found them very open to engage with the other churches.
Oh, that's interesting. So there was no animosity or no ill feelings or...
There was a big problem that wasn't the problem of the ordinary people you work with, but at the level of the bureaucracy. And that was particularly around permissions, around documentation, visas, etc. That is an extremely complicated world in Russia, and would even up to now is an ongoing difficulty for people who come to work in Russia.
You say that you're constantly checked for papers and for your passport, I would imagine. And
yes.
Did you have a green card as well?
Amazingly, I got a green card very quickly. I didn't even understand its significance when I got it. But I had it from the beginning, almost from the beginning.
Why do you think you got that so quickly?
I had a very difficult man ahead of me there who had great difficulty with local authority, and I had to continually say to them, I'm not that man. And I think somehow they took that as as an opportunity maybe to be easier on me. But they gave me, he was a Pole, and you got high level of allergy between Russians and Poles, historically, going back to 16th century, and it flares up with very little reason on both sides.
Yeah. The other two, you said there were three of you went out as pioneering missionaries to Russia.
Yes.
Who were the other two fathers with you?
Kevin Blade and Con Doherty.
Where were they from?
Kevin was from Tuam, County Galway, and Con was from Thurles.
Where are they now?
Con is still in Russia. Kevin had to leave a couple of years afterwards with Steve. Did Steve mention to you about having to leave Russia at some point?
He did, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kevin had to leave at the same time. And when Kevin came home, his father got ill and had a long illness. Then his mother got ill and had a long illness. And at the end of that, Kevin decided, I've forgotten all my Russian. I decided that it was better. I think we all decided it was better that he not return at that point.
Okay, but did it take you long to learn the language?
I thought I would learn it quickly, but everyone told me you will not. You will take a year and a half. And it turned out that way, to get a fair acquaintance and fluency, probably a year and a half.
Even with all your academic background?
I wouldn't have had a great history of language learning. I'd be at home. I was good on Greek, Latin, and okay in English and Irish, and I'd read French, but I wouldn't have any, you get people with 6 or 8 or 10 languages, and the fluency in many languages. I wouldn't have had that background, really.
Okay. And orientation?
Orientation was helped for me by the fact of my reading, and I would be very at home in Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and the great Russian writers. That would have helped. The orientation also was helped by the fact that I'd have read a lot and continue to read a lot about the whole Soviet system and about Marxism and its significance in our times and world.
Right. Were you ever interrogated?
I was never interrogated in the sense of police interrogation. I would have been asked questions, and I would sometimes have been approached by the local authorities and say, we want to ask you some questions in this sense. There's nothing in your file. Why is it that there's nothing in your file? Which means the file is there, but in fact, no. But I would have quizzed a lot of times in travelling, that we take out and go through all your documentation, and that would be normal. But we were living between the Black Sea and the Caspian, and that is a hotbed of trouble there in the whole Caucasus world. And that's why, on one occasion, driving to Makhachkala on the Caspian Sea, we had a little mission there. Con Doherty and myself were driving, I suppose it was 20 hours. But we were stopped 20 times on that journey, sometimes for 3/4 of an hour, because they were watching for everything. Lest it was the time of the trouble in Chechnya, and we had to go around Chechnya because it would be too dangerous to go through. So they were watching for people carrying arms and that kind of thing, or bombs. So
right. Was that intimidating?
No, it was annoying in terms of time, but it actually was an added security for us to know that things were being watched for, and in that sense that it made the road a little safer.
Yeah. You moved out of Moscow after only just 3 years.
Oh, after a year. Yeah.
Was it just a year?
Year and a half. Yeah.
And so, were you invited down by the bishop to the Corks?
Yes, the bishop invited us, asked us, would you be happy to work in that area?
Who was the bishop at the time?
Bishop Kondratevich. He was a Belarusian bishop in Moscow, and he was, at that stage he was the only bishop in Russia, only Catholic bishop in Russia. Later, it was divided into 2 in Europe and into 2 dioceses in Siberia, end of Russia.
Yeah.
And then, at that stage, a new bishop came, Bishop Clements, for the southern half of Russia, which looks to be, if you're in the map, it looks a bit small, but if you look at it, it's 11 or 12 times the size of Ireland. Yes, and we went down in response to that, checked out the place, and decided we would go. Yeah. And so we started working in the 2 or 3 republics down there, Dagestan, which is very much in the news, with Chechnya, and Kabardino-Balkarskaya, which is about the size of Munster, and with 2 or 3 parishes there. And we also worked a little bit in Stavropol Krai, or area. So we had quite a big territory. It's very hard to credit what distance means in Russia. For example, the first time we went down, I went by train, and it took me 39 hours in the train without getting off. And I looked at my map, and it was 2 inches. I would meet people going 7 days, or 8 days, or 9 days in journeys by train, bring their big bag of food. They'd get hot water on the train and they had a bed. So that was a normal way of train travel. And it is no way of trying to explain what distance means in Russia, because when you start at the western, in Poland or Belarus, and go almost to Japan, you have done 10 time zones. So distance becomes a major issue in terms of travel, especially then with very difficult climate as well. We have snow for 5 months, 6 months sometimes in winter. So you have that whole, the people have a difficult time.
It's a very harsh climate then.
Very harsh climate. And also, summers are sometimes more harsh. I was there one summer where the heat was up to 55 Celsius. and same year minus 45 cold.